Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa says the African delegation wants to listen with respect to the proposals that Russian President Vladimir Putin and others are putting forward to try and resolve the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Talks are underway in St Petersburg, Russia, between African leaders and President Putin, as you've seen, over African proposals for peace between Russia and Ukraine. The leaders from Senegal, Egypt, Zambia, Uganda, the Congo Republic and the Comoros, as well as South Africa, have been meeting Putin at the Russian government's 18th century Konstantinovsky Palace on the southern shore of the Gulf of Finland. The African leaders are seeking agreement on a series of confidence-building measures, even as Ukraine last week began a counteroffensive to push back Russian forces from Ukrainian soil. Ntebo Mokobo, SABC Senior Political Reporter, tells us more about it. Ntebo, a very good evening to you. So let's just first start on what we've seen there. If you could just bring us up to speed after that meeting, those talks, what would have been the next step? What is happening now?
Well, good evening, Tsepiso, and give good evening to the viewers at home. Yes, deliberations have taken place. Have happened or took place at St. Peter's with President Putin, and the the African delegation was led by President Cyril Ramaphosa. From now, it is up to the two countries, that is Ukraine and Russia, to sort of come up with a way forward in terms of finding a lasting solution to this conflict. You would recall that, yesterday President Ramaphosa and his team met with President Zelensky, and they gave him the 10 proposal that Africa is putting on the table. And they made an assurance to him that now they will be going to St. Petersburg to meet with President Putin. They've also tabled those proposals. It is up to the two leaders now to make sure that those proposals are looked into and they work together to ensure that they end the conflict. Remember, the president of the continent, those 7 leaders or those 7 countries, with other countries representing their sending their representation, they said to President Putin as well as President Zelensky that the conflict is affecting the economies of small countries, especially in the continent, and it is in the best interest for the rest of the continent of Africa to ensure that that violence or that conflict comes to an end. And all those parties, the warring parties, both President Zelensky and President Putin, also saw the need to end the conflict. They said, especially President Putin this afternoon said that there was a proposal that they need to negotiate, and Turkey was central in sort of opening up negotiations between the two countries. But the acting president of Ukraine then decided to abandon everything because he was informed or was influenced by his Western allies. So it is in the interest of both countries to really end the violence. And they said they will look into the proposal that were put on the table by African leaders, and after that they will make sure that those proposals are then attended to, and they will see what will happen.
Interesting that you raise that, Ntebo, because I'm wondering what the viewpoint of those who are observing this process think. President Zelensky defiantly saying that he finds it very difficult to negotiate with Russia, particularly President Putin, calling him a deceptive, and obviously putting certain conditions before he agrees to talks. Did the African leaders feel like their trip there was a success? Did they feel that they had something to offer President Putin to say, look, this is how far we've come?
Indeed, African leaders were very confident that ultimately both President Zelensky and President Putin will see the light and end this conflict. Remember, Tsepiso, that the more the conflict continues, the more Russia gets isolated by the rest of the world. Because right now, there is a warrant of arrest that is been that the President Putin has been indicted for alleged war crimes. And if this indictment is effected in any of the countries that he will be visiting, it will be a problem, because it means it will herald the intensification of this conflict. And it is in the best interest of both President Zelensky, according to African leaders, it is in the best interest of the two leaders to make sure that this conflict comes to an end. And of course, I mean, President Cyril Ramaphosa was very clear and unyielding and steadfast on the fact that this violence, I mean, this conflict is really adversely affecting the rest of the continent. You will recall that, I mean, food prices have gone up because we're getting fertilizers as the continent and grain from Europe and from Russia in particular, and that has affected the rest of the continent. You would understand that, I mean, fuel, for instance, in South Africa has become a problem, and that is as a result of this conflict. And President Ramaphosa implored both leaders as the head of the African delegation to say this conflict has to end. If it doesn't end, then it will cause a serious problem, not just for the two countries, but for the rest of the continent and even the world.
And now the fallout from over this, as you say, whose interest is it in? South Africa, its non-aligned stance has seen American representatives of the House calling for it to be punished, particularly through AGOA, whichever way you want to paraphrase it. It's clear that they're not happy with South Africa's non-aligned stance. What about other African leaders? Could they also face some sort of sanction because of what they see as a non-aligned stance, going to Europe saying they are a peace mission?
Indeed, if this conflict continues, and if the rest of the continent is seen as taking a position or a posture of a non-aligned stance, and that non-aligned stance says something as opposed to indeed being non-partisan in the conflict, that on its own will become a problem for the rest of those countries or those leaders who attended this gathering. Because, I mean, I think the West has nailed its colors to the mast to say South Africa is partisan in this conflict. But despite that, that has shown that, I mean, these countries that are accusing South Africa that is taking sides on the matter, to say that despite this perception that South Africa is taking side, it has come up with an initiative to say they need to organize African leaders who are adversely affected by this conflict to go and say, we're not going to give them weapons as some of the countries that are claiming not to be fueling this conflict are doing, giving weapons, instead affirming the conflict that is taking place, affirming one faction or one party in the conflict, but not affirming the other. That on its own, it's not a non-aligned. It's not even being non-partisan, but it's taking sides. And that on its own, President Ramaphosa has been very clear that it's not aiding or it's not helping or helping these African leaders to together with the rest of the two warring parties to come to a resolution to end the conflict.
Just a quick final one, Ntebo, I have to ask you this, following your being held back, being stuck in Poland, the latest on when you are traveling back home.
Well, tomorrow we're told that we should be assembling at the receptions of our different or respective hotels, and the buses will be coming to fetch us to Warsaw Chopin Airport, where we'll be we'll be jetting out of this country around 7, we are told. You would recall, Sepiso, that the flight has been here for some time. According to the aviation rules, we are told it has to be in South Africa latest by tomorrow. Latest by Monday morning. So there is no way in which it could be here for some time, because just being at the airport, it has been paying for just being at the airport. So tomorrow by 7 o'clock, we should be jetting out of Poland. We should be expected in South Africa around Monday morning, or just in the early hours of Monday. It's 11-hour, 15 minutes a trip to South Africa.
Well, here's sending hope and cross fingers to you. Thank you very much. Ntebo Mokobo, SABC Senior reporter speaking to us there from Poland, where the media team unfortunately was stuck following they were part of that delegation, of that peace delegation to Ukraine and Russia, but they were unfortunately grounded, including with the security police officials.